Jurassic Park. The very name conjures images, doesn't it? Towering tyrannosaurs, clever velociraptors, perhaps a gentle brachiosaurus munching on a treetop. It was a place of wonder, of terror, of truly astonishing biological resurrection. John Hammond, bless his ambitious heart, wanted to show us something that would drive the kids crazy. He certainly managed that, though perhaps not always in the way he intended. But imagine, if you will, a slight deviation in the scientific blueprint, a tiny, almost imperceptible change in the genetic code they so painstakingly reassembled. What if, instead of ferocious, scaly beasts, the labs cooked up something altogether different, something softer, something with a penchant for Werther's originals? The scientists, you see, were aiming for dinosaurs. Of course they were. That was the whole point. The posters had been printed. The little plastic dinosaur toys were already in the gift shop, waiting for eager hands. However, science, as it often does, had a little chuckle at their expense. A stray strand of DNA, perhaps from a discarded biscuit crumb left near a vital piece of equipment, or maybe a mix-up with a sample labeled Ancient Wisdom instead of Ancient Reptile. The result? Not a single T-Rex, not one Triceratops. Instead, the park's first batch of assets turned out to be rather enormous, cloned older women. Giant grannies, to put it plainly. Quite the surprise for everyone involved, especially the chap who designed the raptor-proof fences. The initial reaction was, shall we say, muted. Stunned silence, mostly, followed by a great deal of head-scratching. And then someone, probably an intern with a very dry sense of humor, started to giggle. Giant grannies. What on earth would they? Would they chase the jeeps? Unlikely. Unless the jeeps were driving too fast, in which case a stern telling off was almost guaranteed. Would they roar? Well, some of them had a rather impressive booming laugh, especially after a particularly good joke or a successful round of bingo, which the park hastily considered installing. The island paradise, once destined for primal screams, was now facing the prospect of gentle sighs and the clicking of enormous knitting needles. So, the park was subtly rebranded. The welcome sign still read Jurassic Park, but underneath, in smaller letters, now with extra comfort and unsolicited advice. The iconic jeeps still trundled along the tracks, but the emergency kits now contained smelling salts, strong tea, and a plentiful supply of digestive biscuits. The warning signs were updated too. Caution low-flying dentures. Do not feed the grannies after 6 p.m. It disturbs their sleep. And most importantly, beware of sudden hugs may cause mild suffocation. It was, to put it mildly, a whole new ballgame, or perhaps a whole new ball of yarn. The cloning process itself remained a closely guarded secret, mostly because the scientists were still a bit embarrassed by the outcome. They mumbled something about complex sequence anomalies and unexpected maternal gene expression. Privately, rumors circulated about a rogue scientist who thought dinosaurs were a bit too mainstream and decided to spice things up. Perhaps he'd found a perfectly preserved hairpin in a lump of amber and thought, well, why not? The specifics are hazy, much like a giant granny's memory of what she had for breakfast last Tuesday. But the results were undeniably and quite literally massive. These were not just any grannies, these were supersized matriarchs. Several distinct species of giant granny soon emerged, each with her own unique charm and set of quirks. There was the formidable Agnosaurus rex, a colossal figure with a voice that could curdle milk at 50 paces, especially if you forgot to say please or thank you. She had a stare that could make even the bravest park ranger question his life choices. Then there was the Mildred Actyl, known for her tendency to hover, offering advice on everything from sensible footwear to the correct way to brew tea. She also had an unnerving habit of patting people on the head, a gesture made somewhat alarming by her 20-foot stature. And let's not forget Duraceratops, always seen with giant knitting needles, producing scarves the size of small fields. Their enclosures, or retirement sanctuaries as the park's marketing team hastily rebranded them, were marvels of oversized domesticity. Imagine colossal armchairs, upholstered in floral patterns visible from space, enormous television screens, permanently tuned to reruns of classic game shows and soap operas, the theme tunes echoing across the island. The paddocks were dotted with giant teapots, constantly brewing, and mountains of biscuits restocked daily by a dedicated team of very brave bakers. One enclosure even featured a gigantic yarn ball, the size of a small car, which Duraceratops would bat around playfully, occasionally sending it careening into the electrified fence, which merely tickled her. the grand unveiling to the first group of paying and slightly apprehensive tourists was less a roar of primal fury and more a collective booming, "Well, hello dears! Have you eaten? You all look a bit peaky." The sight of a 50-foot-tall woman peering down with kindly, if slightly short-sighted eyes, caused a mixture of awe, confusion, and a sudden craving for a nice cuppa. One granny, seeing a child drop an ice cream, produced a handkerchief the size of a tablecloth and offered to make it all better, nearly causing a diplomatic incident when she tried to wipe the child's face with it. It was clear this Jurassic Park was going to be a very different kind of adventure. The day-to-day running of Granny Park, as it was affectionately nicknamed by staff, was filled with wonderfully absurd scenarios. One afternoon, a tour jeep got stuck in the mud. Before the winch could even be engaged, a colossal hand belonging to Brenda, one of the more active grannies, reached down. She picked up the jeep, passengers and all, as if it were a dinky toy. After placing it gently back on the path, she tutted loudly, "They don't make them like they used to, do they? Needs a good polish, this one." The tourists, once they'd recovered from being dangled 50 feet in the air, gave her a round of applause, which she acknowledged with a queenly wave. Feeding time was another spectacle. Instead of live goats or sides of beef, the main attraction was the Great Biscuit Drop. A crane would slowly lower a pallet laden with oversized biscuits, Garibaldis the size of surfboards, custard creams as big as manhole covers. The grannies would gather, not with bared teeth, but with polite, albeit very loud requests for just one more, dear, if you don't mind. Sometimes a playful squabble would break out over a particularly appealing jammy dodger, ending only when Agnosaurus Rex intervened with a deafening, "Now, now, girls, share nicely," which usually did the trick, mostly out of sheer terror. The park's infrastructure faced unique challenges. The Wi-Fi system was a constant source of frustration, not because of tropical storms, but because several grannies had discovered tablets, custom-built naturally, and were attempting to video call relatives who, being clones, didn't technically exist. This led to many confused calls to the IT department, with complaints like, "My Ethel isn't picking up, is the internet broken again, young man?" Furthermore, the grannies had very particular ideas about climate control. "There's a terrible draft in this paddock," one might complain, despite the tropical heat, leading to staff attempting to build giant granny-sized cardigans. Unintended consequences abounded. The gift shop, initially stocked with dinosaur paraphernalia, quickly had to pivot. Sales of giant knitting needles, enormous tea cozies, and "I survived a hug from a giant granny" t-shirts went through the roof. Children, surprisingly, adored the grannies. They'd wave and the grannies would wave back, sometimes causing minor tremors. One little boy, Billy, became a park legend after he offered his own normal-sized biscuit to Mildred Actel. She peered at it, then at him, then boomed, "Oh, aren't you a sweet boy? But that's just a crumb for me, love," before producing a biscuit the size of his head from her pocket and offering him a piece. The interactions between the colossal grannies and the comparatively tiny tourists became the park's main draw. Forget the thrill of a T-Rex chase. Here, the excitement came from a 50-foot granny leaning over the fence to offer a surprisingly insightful comment on your choice of holiday attire. "That hat is lovely, dear, but does it really go with those shoes?" one might observe, her voice echoing through the valley. Or, "You'll catch your death of cold without a vest, young man." This often directed at sunburnt tourists in the sweltering tropical heat. It was like having 1,000 concerned giant relatives all at once. Younger visitors often had the most amusing reactions. Some were initially quite scared, understandably. A face the size of a small car peering at you can be a bit much before you've had your morning juice. But many were utterly captivated. They'd shout greetings, and the grannies, delighted by the attention, would coo back, "Aren't you a little poppet?" One granny, Patricia Soros, developed a habit of trying to pat children on the head, a gesture that required careful supervision from park rangers to avoid accidental flattening. She also tried to fix a boy's messy hair, nearly giving him a permanent side parting with one gentle, house-sized finger. The park staff, a resilient and endlessly patient bunch, developed new skill sets. Negotiating bedtime with a granny who insisted on just one more chapter of her oversized audiobook required diplomatic skills worthy of the UN. Dealing with complaints about the lumpiness of a mattress the size of a tennis court was a weekly occurrence. And then there were the medical emergencies. Not for the grannies, who were surprisingly robust, but for tourists who'd fainted from the sheer shock of being offered a boiled sweet the size of a rugby ball, or after receiving a particularly enthusiastic, bone-crushing hug. And so, Jurassic Park, or rather Granny Park, found its peculiar rhythm. It wasn't the adrenaline-fueled terror ride InGen had envisioned. Instead, it became a place of bizarre, heartwarming, and incredibly loud encounters. The funny twist? The grannies, with their eons of cloned wisdom, started offering surprisingly good advice. Tourists would queue up, not for a glimpse of a prehistoric beast, but for a chat with Agnosaurus Rex about their relationship problems, or to get Mildred Achtel's surprisingly astute and booming take on their career choices. The park, quite unexpectedly, became the world's largest, loudest, and most beloved therapy center. And occasionally, a faint, familiar roar could be heard from a forgotten corner of the island, where a few actual, very confused dinosaurs had finally hatched, wondering where all the people and the giant walking, talking tea cozies had come from.